It was the height of the morning rush on a busy Manhattan subway platform. Commuters swarmed in waves, heads down, hurrying to their destinations. The fluorescent lights bathed everything in a harsh, pale glow. Amid the clatter of footsteps and train announcements, a sudden stillness began to spread from one end of the platform. At the center of this eerie pause stood an unlikely pair. A tall, distinguished-looking older man had come to a rigid stop in front of a ragged, homeless woman. His heels clicked together sharply on the concrete. Then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his right hand to his brow in a crisp salute. The crowd around them fell into a stunned hush. The woman blinked in disbelief. Her matted hair framed a face etched with hardship and humility. She sat against a pillar with a tattered duffel bag at her side, wearing a threadbare army field jacket. On her forearm, partially hidden under grime, was a faded tattoo of a medic's emblem. It had been years since anyone acknowledged her existence, let alone honored her service. And now this stranger, with unmistakable military bearing, was saluting her. Time seemed to freeze. A businessman mid-stride stopped in his tracks, mouth agape. A mother gently pulled her curious child closer, whispering for him to watch quietly. In the distance, a train's brakes squealed, but on the platform, no one moved a muscle. All eyes were locked on the solemn exchange unfolding before them. For a heartbeat, the homeless veteran didn't move. Emotions flooded her eyes, confusion, fear, and a long-forgotten pride battling within. Her trembling hand lifted uncertainly toward her brow, instinctively recalling an old ritual of respect. As her fingertips touched her temple in a return salute, a tear escaped down her cheek. Not a soul on that platform expected to witness such a moment that day. In the middle of New York City's relentless rush, time stood still at the sight of honor given where it was due. What would come next was a story none of them would ever forget. If you also believe that every veteran deserves respect and honor, join us by subscribing. Earlier that morning, the woman had taken her usual spot against a cold, tiled wall of the subway station. Her name was Rachel Thompson, and 10 years ago she wore a uniform and saved lives as an Army medic. Now she wore a threadbare coat over fatigues long past their prime, a pair of worn boots, and the weight of countless lonely nights. Dark circles under her eyes and the slump in her shoulders told the story of a veteran who had fallen on hard times. Commuters passed by without a second glance. Some clutched their bags a little tighter when they noticed her. Others stepped aside with barely concealed disgust, as if her misfortune might be contagious. Rachel kept her gaze low, ashamed and invisible. In front of her was a cardboard sign scrawled with shaky letters, "Veteran in need. Please help." Most people pretended not to see it. A few tossed loose change, not slowing down enough to meet her eyes. The station's air was filled with the smell of stale coffee and the rumble of approaching trains. But for Rachel, the world felt empty and silent. As she sat there, Rachel's mind drifted to memories of better days. She could almost feel the weight of a younger comrade leaning on her shoulder, bleeding and scared in a desert far away. "You're gonna be okay," she had whispered to that soldier years ago, pressing a bandage to his wound under a hail of distant gunfire. Back then, she had a purpose. People relied on her. Lives were saved by her steady hands. Now, no one even acknowledged her existence. A lump rose in her throat as she wondered if all her sacrifice had meant anything. At the far end of the platform, a tall, silver-haired man in a neatly pressed suit waited for the next train. General David Armstrong was on leave, blending in with the city crowd in his civilian clothes. Few would guess from his relaxed posture and warm smile that he was one of the Army's most respected officers. He was headed to visit an old friend that morning, but something else had captured his attention. His keen eyes caught sight of Rachel's sign and the faded medical emblem tattooed on her forearm. In an instant, the general's easy smile faded. A mix of recognition and concern flashed across his face. General Armstrong watched as a pair of teenagers walked past the homeless woman, loudly laughing and tossing an empty soda can that narrowly missed her. Rachel flinched but stayed quiet, her cheeks burning with humiliation. A businessman in a trench coat nearly tripped over her outstretched leg and swore under his breath, "Damn vagrant," before disappearing into a train car. Not one person stopped to ask if she was okay. Rachel's eyes stung, not just from exhaustion, but from the cruelty. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter around herself, as if it could shield her from the stares and insults. She wished she could become truly invisible. Just then, one of the teenagers who had thrown the can doubled back, egged on by his snickering friend. The boy sneered at Rachel. "Why don't you get a job or something, huh?" He kicked at her cardboard sign, sending the coins she'd collected clinking across the platform. His friend pulled out a phone, recording and chuckling as if it were some kind of twisted entertainment. Tears of frustration welled up in Rachel's eyes, but she bit her lip and said nothing. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. If you saw someone treating a homeless veteran this way, what would you do? A few feet away, General Armstrong's hands clenched into fists. He had seen enough. The disrespect unfolding before him was more than he could tolerate. His mind flashed back to the battlefields where medics like Rachel had been the difference between life and death for soldiers under his command. He remembered a night in Kandahar when a combat medic, a young woman with a steady voice, refused to leave him behind after an ambush, tending to his wounds under heavy fire. That medic's bravery saved his life. Now, here he was, watching a medic just like her being humiliated in public. Before the teenager could hurl another insult, General Armstrong stepped forward with purpose. He moved swiftly through the crowd, each step filled with quiet outrage and determination. The boy with the phone noticed the imposing man approaching and lowered his camera, suddenly uneasy. Rachel, eyes cast down as she gathered the scattered coins with shaking fingers, didn't see the general striding toward her yet. A hush fell over those who noticed the tall man's march. Something about his presence commanded attention. General Armstrong stopped directly in front of Rachel and the sneering teen. The general's jaw was set, and a fiery glint had ignited in his eyes. The teenager stumbled back a step, his smug grin fading under the weight of the older man's steely glare. Rachel looked up, confused by the sudden silence around her. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, in a move that no one expected, General Armstrong drew himself up even straighter and brought his hand sharply to his brow. He offered Rachel a perfect, respectful salute. His face was solemn, his eyes shining with conviction. The crowd looked on, baffled and silent. Rachel's heart nearly stopped. She stared, wide-eyed, at the general in front of her. Then years of training and instinct kicked in. Scrambling to her feet, she somehow summoned the strength to stand at attention. With trembling fingers, she returned his salute, her hand lifting to her brow in acknowledgement. Tears blurred her vision as she gazed at the general. In that instant, she felt like a soldier again, seen, valued, and proud. General Armstrong held the salute a moment longer, as if to make sure everyone watching understood the significance. Finally, he lowered his arm and gave Rachel a gentle nod. "At ease, soldier," he said softly, his voice warm with respect. Rachel let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She lowered her shaking arm, her whole body quivering with emotion. A ripple went through the gathered commuters. What they had just witnessed was extraordinary. An older woman near the front of the crowd wiped away a tear. A burly construction worker removed his hard hat and held it over his heart. The teenager with the phone slowly lowered his arm. The phone's camera still recording, but forgotten in his hand. He stood there, face flushed and eyes wide with regret and awe. General Armstrong turned his gaze to the teen who had kicked the sign. The boy could barely meet the general's eyes. The stern disappointment on the officer's face was punishment enough. "Son," the general said evenly, "have you ever served your country?" The teenager swallowed hard and shook his head. No, sir," he mumbled. The general nodded once, his jaw tight. "Then show some respect to someone who has." The boy's cheeks burned red. Without a word, he knelt down and started picking up the scattered coins and the crumpled cardboard sign. His friend, face pale, quickly joined to help, not daring to say anything. As the teens collected her spilled coins, others on the platform stepped forward out of the shadows of indifference. A middle-aged man in a suit who had been watching from a few steps away stepped closer to Rachel. "Ma'am," he said, voice unsteady, "I'm sorry. And thank you for your service." He placed a crisp $20 bill on top of her small pile of coins in the boy's hand. A young woman with bright pink hair elbowed through the crowd and gently draped a knitted scarf over Rachel's shoulders, giving her a kind smile. "You deserve better than this," the woman whispered. Rachel stood in shock, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. Thank you," she stammered quietly, unsure how to respond to kindness after so much time alone. As the teenagers handed back her sign and coins, Rachel saw that one of them had added his own few crumpled dollars to the pile, his hand shaking slightly as he gave them to her. He couldn't meet her eyes, but his shame and gratitude were clear. She accepted the money and her sign back, holding them to her chest like precious things. General Armstrong reached out and rested a firm, gentle hand on Rachel's shoulder to steady her. There was a pride in his eyes, mixed with compassion. He understood what this moment meant. "What's your name, medic?" he asked softly. His use of the word medic made Rachel stand a little taller. "Our Rachel, sir, Rachel Thompson," she replied, voice trembling. The general nodded. "Well, Rachel, you're among friends here." For the first time in forever, Rachel felt a small, genuine smile tug at her lips. Her tears kept coming, but now they were tears of relief. She raised her hand to her face, covering a sob of happiness. The general gently guided her to sit back down on the station bench, waving away anyone who still stared too closely. A few onlookers were quietly clapping now, and a murmur of approval and emotion ran through the crowd. Above them, the station loudspeakers announced the arrival of the next train. Life on the platform was starting to move again, but something had changed profoundly in those few minutes. People were still watching Rachel and the general, not out of morbid curiosity, but with respect. A man who had been about to board the incoming train hesitated, then decided to stay back on the platform. He didn't want to turn away from what he'd just seen. Strangers approached Rachel to shake her hand, or simply to nod in respect as they passed. She even received a hesitant salute from an elderly gentleman wearing a Vietnam veteran cap as he stepped forward, his eyes wet with emotion. Amidst the subtle commotion, Rachel clutched her sign and duffel tightly, afraid this all might just be a dream. But General Armstrong's reassuring presence beside her felt solid and real. The general pulled out a business card from his coat and pressed it into Rachel's hand. "We take care of our own. I'm going to make some calls for you, okay?" he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Rachel nodded, speechless, and looked at the card through her tears. She saw the general's name and an army insignia embossed in gold. Hope, a feeling she thought she'd lost forever, flickered to life inside her. On the fringes of the crowd, the teenager who had recorded the incident finally stopped filming. His hands were still trembling. Without a word, he turned off his phone's camera. He had intended to capture something to laugh at, but instead he had witnessed something deeply moving. Unsure what to do, he simply stood there, clutching his phone and absorbing the lesson he'd just learned. Nearby, a transit police officer who had arrived for his morning shift stood quietly. He hadn't needed to intervene. Respect and compassion had kept the peace here today. He approached and gently asked the small crowd to clear a path for others. Slowly, people began to disperse, many casting last, admiring glances back at Rachel and her unexpected protector. Before the general left her side that morning, he made sure Rachel had everything she needed in that moment: a promise of help, a warm scarf around her shoulders, and the respect of everyone present. As he finally stepped onto the next train, bound for his original destination, General Armstrong gave Rachel one more nod through the window. She straightened and gave a final, humble salute as the train doors closed. In return, the general offered a heartfelt smile and a parting salute of his own. The train whisked him away, but the impact of his actions remained, glowing warmly in Rachel's heart. Little did Rachel know, the video of General Armstrong saluting her was already making its way onto the internet. The young bystander's footage captured the entire poignant scene: the mockery, the salute, the collective change of heart. By that evening, that video would spread like wildfire, touching the hearts of millions and setting in motion events that would soon transform her life. If you believe every hero deserves this kind of recognition, join us by subscribing. In the hours that followed, the scene on that subway platform became a worldwide story. The video, posted by the chastened teenager with a heartfelt apology, spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, dubbing it the salute seen around the world. Rachel's name and face, once lost in the crowd, now commanded the nation's attention. But this time, the attention was compassionate. Offers of help poured in. The Department of Veterans Affairs reached out to ensure Rachel received the benefits and support she was due. A local veterans housing program offered her furnished apartment and counseling, vowing she'd never spend another night on a station floor. Donations from strangers amassed to give Rachel a fresh start. People were moved by her story and wanted to be part of her recovery. True to his word, General Armstrong stayed in touch. The day after the incident, he met Rachel at a veterans center where she was recovering. Clean, fed, and rested, she already looked like a new person. When the general walked in, Rachel stood up straight and greeted him, eyes shining with gratitude. He shook her hand warmly. She tried to thank him, but he gently insisted that it was the nation that owed her thanks. She was no longer alone, and they both knew it. Not long after, a small ceremony was held at a nearby army base to honor Rachel. Dressed in clean clothes and standing tall, she accepted a plaque and a folded American flag from a local commander, as an audience of soldiers and supportive civilians applauded. Among them were some of the very commuters who had witnessed her ordeal. The young woman who had given her a scarf, the businessman who had offered money, and even the teen who had mocked her, now standing quietly at the back. When the ceremony ended, that teenager approached Rachel with tears in his eyes and apologized. Rachel forgave him without hesitation, pulling him into a brief, understanding hug. The crowd's applause swelled as the young man stepped back, visibly relieved and grateful. In the weeks that followed, Rachel moved into her new home, a cozy, sunlit apartment. On the wall, she hung the plaque and flag, reminders that her service was honored and her past sacrifices mattered. She also reconnected with a fellow Army medic who saw the viral video and had been searching for her. Bolstered by these reunions and support, Rachel decided to use her skills again. With some of the donated funds, she enrolled in a nursing course and soon started volunteering at a local clinic. Helping others heal gave her life purpose again, just as it had during her military days. General Armstrong became a mentor and friend. Over occasional coffee meetings, he listened proudly to Rachel's updates about classes and volunteer work. Each time, he reminded her that her strength and resilience were what truly inspired everyone. Their unlikely friendship stood as another beautiful outcome of that day. The impact of the subway moment rippled far and wide. Inspired viewers around the country launched initiatives to help homeless veterans in their own cities. Even the once mischievous teenager became an advocate. He spent his weekends volunteering with a veterans outreach group, determined to atone for his past ignorance by making a positive difference. Rachel's journey from invisible to empowered carried a powerful lesson. In the end, her story proved that true respect transcends appearances. A tattered coat or weary face doesn't tell the whole story of a person's worth. One act of honor from a stranger had restored a forgotten hero's dignity and sparked a chain reaction of compassion. New York's morning rush hour continues each day with its usual hustle, but those who witnessed that extraordinary salute will never rush by so quickly again. They'll remember the woman who was lifted up by a moment of kindness, and Rachel, no longer forgotten, now stands tall with hope in her heart. She learned that sometimes one simple act of kindness can change a life forever.